Welcome to a summer quick dip with a difference. I'm joined by Dr. Sarah Coope. Sarah.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Rachel. Yes, so I'm working with you now as head of training at Wild Monday. I'm a former GP and an executive coach with a real interest in conflict resolution and burnout prevention as well.
Great to have you with me. The reason we got Sarah with us on this quick tip is I thought, what do people want to know over the summer? And I don't know about you, but when I'm going away on holiday, I just need to know what I'm going to read. I'm quite obsessed with books. And whether this is reading or whether this is audiobooks, I know a lot of people are really finding that audiobooks are just really brilliant for them right now. But I love just getting some new ideas and stuff to think about. So we thought we would give a rundown of our top books to read over the summer. I was at a training session. I did a whole Shapes toolkit for consultants last week. And at the end, somebody came up to me and he said, Rachel, if you're going to recommend just one book, what would it be? So I've got that recommendation with me. We've got another few. In fact, as I'm saying that, I'm thinking of other books I want to talk about that I haven't even got with me. But anyway, I've got my pile. Sarah, I know you read a lot. What sort of books do you like to read when you go away and why?
Yeah, I always pack far too many books, and then find other books on my Kindle probably while I'm away as well. But I tend to take at least two sort of just easy to read self-development books, often ones I've read before that I just think, I want to go through that again. I do like a bit of fiction as well, some crime detective novels, but we're not going to talk about those today. What about you? What sort of things do you like to pack?
Rubbish. Rubbish crime fiction. I'm a big fan of the St Mary's Chronicles, which I found about in a medic's book group, actually, which is good, but I'm not going to talk about them. Let's talk about these sort of self-development books because, my other half calls them self-help books. They're not. They are self-development books. And I can genuinely say they've changed my life. And this is where I got into all this stuff around, personal efficacy, self-awareness, resilience, all that sort of thing. And books are amazing. Can I just say there's so much in a book? Like you might spend £1,000 on someone's course and then you find the book and they've pretty much written it all in the book. It does take a little bit more effort though, I guess. And that's why maybe some people really struggle with it. A quick tip for people is that all the books we talk about today, if you're not a big fan of reading and you don't get on with audiobooks either, you can often find podcasts where the authors have gone on the podcast and pretty much summarise the entire book. So that's the way I digest a lot of these things, is listen to some of the podcasts, hear some new authors, think, oh, that's an interesting book. I'll go and get that. So I'll listen to them first on the podcast and then I'll go and buy the book. It seems like a bit more of a possible way of doing it. You're sort of pre-screening it beforehand. But Sarah, what would be, if someone came to you and said, what one book would be helpful for me to read over the summer, what would you be saying?
So I've got a couple of books. I'll show you one of them. So one is Rediscovered, and that's by Catherine Astor. That came out earlier this year. So this book is written for late discovered or late diagnosed women who are autistic or ADHD, but particularly autistic women. And it says, and their allies. So I found it really interesting as a doctor and as a late discovered autistic person myself at the age of 49 last year to read that and understand. It's a bit like someone, well, the Catherine Astor, the author, is also late discovered autistic. And so very much as I've read through that, it's really struck me just my experience, understanding as a doctor as well as a former GP, what I didn't know about some of the presentations of autism, particularly in women. So I think a lot of medics would find that really insightful. She talks a lot about the research that's been done there, the research that's needed to be done, and also gives some really positive advice and strategies for people who either are autistic or train, support, supervise, have members of their family, friends who also are, and just ways of really understanding the world for them, which, for myself has been a big learning curve over the last sort of 6-9 months.
What were the aha moments that you thought, God, I wish I'd known that 10 years ago when I was working as a GP?
I think from a GP perspective, it was understanding that some of the physical presentations, such as hypermobility, so like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, migraine, chronic chronic pelvic pain, recurrent UTIs, polycystic ovarian syndrome. Some of those conditions are much more common in neurodivergent individuals. And I never knew that. And looking at your reaction, I'm guessing
I
you
didn't know
didn't
that.
either.
No.
And I think it's fairly recent research that's shown that, but it just makes so much sense. That it's chronic inflammation, chronic stress that is often underlying a lot of those conditions. And so for people, especially women who probably have that additional stress of being trained and conditioned to mask so much more from an early stage, will often present in those ways. Also chronic fatigue, other things like that, that we've often as doctors not always known. And I'm sure there's so much work still to be done, isn't there? But not always knowing what underlying causes are. And I'm not saying that for every person with those conditions, then it would be neurodivergence as the underlying cause. I think it's about thinking about that. I remember when I taught medical students, I'd often say, what else could it be when you think about the differential diagnosis? So it's just asking that question in order to consider it.
That's interesting. So I was thinking, gosh, is that genetically linked? But no, that makes sense that actually it's the stress that comes with maybe being neurodivergent and this masking that people have to do to just like survive in the real world, which causes the inflammation in the cortisol.
Yeah, I mean, there is that it's looking like there's a genetic component, or has looked like that for quite a long time, I think, with a lot of neurodivergent conditions. And of course, the complexity with trauma in early life and those things. But so that was an aha moment, I think, for me as a medic. And then for me as a late discovered autistic woman who had no idea until maybe a year ago started to wonder. And then it's just made so much sense. Understanding about burnout on repeat, understanding about just masking and the cost that is for people like myself, just how we're able to mask. And it's not about pretending, it's just what we're required to do often to fit in, and the difference that can make in terms of just that sensory overload and exhaustion. So I think that's been very validating, and then helping me understand just what autism means in that way. And also just, I think, being able to deal with people's reactions. I'm only recently sharing my diagnosis because it takes a little bit of processing myself. And of course, she talks in the book a lot about people's reactions to herself as a psychologist, sharing her diagnosis, and how there'll be the typical response, well, you don't look autistic, or, well, you can't be autistic because you make eye contact, or you can't be autistic because you empathise. And just understanding, actually, that's not true. There's such a diverse presentation in so many people. And often a lot of autistic people have those as their strengths.
So that's a book for you if you maybe think you might be autistic or have ADHD yourself, just to understand yourself a bit more. But also you think all healthcare professionals should probably read it just so that they can spot some of these signs in their patients.
I think so. And particularly in women, because, again, the research is showing it does present differently often. I'm generalising, but differently often in women, especially women of my generation, just because of some of the conditioning. So I think it's very interesting to read. Yeah. And worth just checking out for discussion. I think it'd be a great discussion for a book to discuss at, say, a peer study group or something like that, just to say, what have you learned? What did you not know? And what will you do differently?
I love that idea. So if people are lacking a bit of connection, want a bit of CPD to get together in a peer book group, let us know if you're going to do that. So this book is Rediscovered by
Catherine Asta, ASTA. So Rediscovered by Catherine Asta. She has a podcast as well, and I think it's the same name, or the Late Discovered Circle, I think. But yeah, this book is worth a read.
And we are hopefully going to get her on our podcast if we can. And just to say that we are going to be thinking about a community for doctors with neurodivergence or feel that they might have a neurodivergent diagnosis, even if they haven't been officially diagnosed. Keep your eyes peeled for stuff around that later on in the year. And if that's you, just get in touch with us and let us know. So what sort of things do you struggle with, and what would you like to hear about on the podcast as well? So thanks, Sarah. That book sounds really important. The book I'm going to recommend for the essential thing to read over the summer is Essentialism. Now, I can't remember how many times I have recommended this book to people. Honestly, I should have shares in this book. I do not have shares in this book. But Greg McKeown, if you're listening, please come on the podcast. Obviously, he's listening to you, or not a frog. This book was recommended to me by a coach I was speaking to maybe 8 or 9 years ago. I'm not quite sure when it actually came out. 2014. Yeah. So it's over 10 years old, and it can be life-changing for people. The strapline is the disciplined pursuit of less. I like to say, well, it's really about do fewer things, but better. And it's basically a bit of a manual for life. It talks about what problem do I want? There's always going to be a trade-off. Strategy is about making choices. Trade-offs, it's about deliberately choosing to be different. Like, you need a strategy for your life. You cannot keep doing everything. This was one of the first books that introduced me to the real power of choice, the fact we can choose, but often we don't like the choices that we've got. They feel too difficult. And it really talks about how to do less, uncommitting to stuff, eliminating stuff, sleeping, protecting your asset. It's a bit of a sort of modern day 7 habits of highly effective people. But I think the one thing it just instills in me is that we can do anything. Like, doctors, healthcare professionals are really, really competent, have got a lot of skills, but we cannot do everything. We cannot do everything. And as Oliver Burkeman in another book, 4,000 Weeks, that's another huge recommendation. As he says, we only have about 4,000 weeks on this planet, give or take. We're not going to get to do 99.99999% of everything that there is to do on this planet. We're going to have to choose what we spend our one wild and precious life doing. Essentialism really helps with that. It really helps talk about the impact of just focusing on a few things. And I remember one of the stories in Essentialism that really struck me was talking about a guy who'd just sold his business. And he wanted to prove that he was still helpful to the company that had bought it because he was still in the business. And so he made sure he went to every single meeting. He made sure he was still doing lots and lots of things. He was very, very visible. And he went for some coaching because he just found himself not being very effective at all. And he thought about, well, how can I improve my visibility? How can I have a better impact in this new business that's been taken over by this new company? And the coach spoke to him and said, your problem is you're just spread so thin. You're not having an impact on anything. And said to this guy, what you need to do is only go to meetings where you are 100% needed. You are only to do those things that nobody else can do. Try it for a month or so. So this guy tried it, and his impact shot through the roof. His enjoyment of work increased. People were appreciating him again for what he was doing. Now, I know it's hard to translate this over into medicine. It really, really is, particularly when we have the day job that we've got to do. We've got all that patient care, that frontline stuff. And then there's a lot of the leadership stuff that often happens outside of work. But I do observe people getting stuck in the urgency trap, and what we call the urgency trap. And quick side note, we've got some urgency trap training coming up soon. So if you want to join, we'll put the link in the show notes. But that's where you're firefighting everything for everybody else. And so you're not ever getting to your own stuff. And it makes you really ineffective and really decreases your impact. And I see when doctors get stuck in the urgency trap, they end up doing stuff and they say, I'm so busy, I'm coaching. If I'm coaching people or talking to participants in training, they say, yeah, well, I've got to do this, that, and the other. And I'm thinking about it and going, that is not important. Objectively, anybody would say to you, you really don't need to do that. That is not mission critical. That's not going to move the needle for your patients or for your department or anything. Yet they're still feeling that they ought to do it. And you lose the ability to distinguish what actually is important and what's not. And I guess the amygdala is all tied up in that, making you feel guilty if you're not going to do everything that everybody wants you to do all the time. But essentialism really helps just cut through all the chat, all the external stuff, and think, what is the really important stuff that only I can do, and let me focus on that, and gives you some suggestions for how to focus on that as well. So that Essentialism by Greg McKeown has had a massive impact on me. Strapline, the disciplined pursuit of less.
And the power of choice. I think that really stood out from what you've just said. And it's something I've had to apply. And it sounds like you've really taken over from that, recognizing we always have a choice. We just don't always like the choice we have. And sometimes we forget that we have a choice when it comes down to, I have to do that. I should do that. And so we often need to step back and go, actually, what would happen if I didn't? How's that working out for me when I try to do all that, like in the urgency trap? Yeah, so who might want to take that in their suitcase on holiday, do you think?
I think anybody who's overwhelmed, anyone who's just thinking, I am on a hamster wheel. I'm running as fast as I can just to stay still. And when I get home, I'm exhausted and just go to work and do it all again the next day. And thinking I am not even doing a good job in the things that I'm doing. So absolutely, if that's use, just start with this book. It's a bit of a mindset shift, because we need the mindset shift before we actually can put stuff into action. Yeah, it's interesting. Sarah was with some consultants the other day, and we were talking about choice, and they were really struggling with it, because what it turned out was they didn't like the choices that they had. They wished they had a choice to be working in a trust that was wonderful, that was, really helping them, that was giving them the choice about how they spent their time. But it wasn't like that. They were really, really struggling with the system. But there still is choice, even if the only choice you have is whether you stay or go. There is always choice. Nobody has a gun to your head saying you have to. What people don't like is the consequences of their choices. The consequences of leaving, what that means with their family, their income, or the consequences of standing up and saying, no, we can't do this, but we'll do this, or the consequences of drawing a line in the sand saying, I'm going home now, and those patients won't be seen, or, they're going to have to wait, or that, because what if someone thinks badly of me, et cetera, et cetera. But it's always the consequences. I talk about this a lot. It's the consequences of the choices that we don't like. But as Greg McKeown says again, bring it back to essentialism, you can't do everything. You can do anything, but you can't do everything. And I think that's just the message I'll probably have on my gravestone.
That's so true, isn't
She could do anything. She couldn't do everything.
It's so true. I came back to this analogy when I was training last week. I was talking about the two suitcase sizes, the hand luggage and the hold luggage. And I was saying, and again, if you had a whole big suitcase, the 22 kilogram suitcase, and I said, no, sorry, you can't take that. You can only take the 10 kilogram suitcase. You'd accept that you couldn't fit the 22 kilograms into that 10 kilogram suitcase. So I was saying to them in the room, so how would you decide? And of course they said, well, I would take what we really needed. What was a priority? What's just for us? And it is the same principle, isn't it? If you can't take everything on holiday and you can only take a smaller suitcase, what will you choose to take? And it's the same analogy at work, isn't it? You can't do everything. So therefore you have to leave some things out. And when it comes down to prioritizing, sometimes it's hard, isn't it, to say, even when it's the things I'd like to do, I still need to say, no, I'm not going to do that because I am choosing to do this.
I love that analogy of the suitcase. It strikes me that we don't see time as finite. We just think time can stretch. It can't stretch. We need to see time as a possession. And actually, we know that time is a type of wealth. Freedom of time, having the time to do something, that is wealth. So actually seeing it as finite possessions of energy that you have, or space to do stuff, you absolutely can't. We just think we can fit 10 tasks into half an hour when we know we can't, but we're like, oh no, well, I'll just have to do it. And then I'll borrow the rest of that from my sleep or whatever. But actually when you hit 24 hours, you can't do anything else. So I quite like that suitcase analogy. That's really helpful. The problem comes when it's like, well, I would like to take this thing, but someone else is telling me I should take that thing. Who wins out? Is it me or is it the other person?
But yeah, I think time as a currency is really helpful. And that's something why the suitcase analogy works well, because it's like a space, isn't it, that you can fill. And energy the same, and attention. So TEA, time, energy, attention. What are you going to fit into the resource you have? So thinking about time, my next book is this one, Time to Think. So I recommend this, and I think we both do, don't we, on a lot of courses, but especially when we talk about coaching. So Time to Think by Nancy Kline. It might be a book that you have read. I read it first probably 15, maybe plus years ago, when I did a coaching diploma. It's so empowering around recognizing the quality of listening. So as medics, we're often trained, aren't we, how to actively listen, how to listen deeply, not just to what people are saying, but what else is behind it. And I think the quote that really stays with me is that the quality of my listening directly impacts the quality of your thinking. So if I listen well, then that will help you to think well.
I remember reading Time to Think, and it did absolutely change my mind, because she talks about it not just in a one-to-one conversation. She also talks about thinking time in meetings, where you know that if you are given a chance just to talk and no one's going to interrupt you, it's so much easier. People actually talk less. They get much less anxious. And, so it's just creating these thinking environments where people can actually express what they think. Now, I'm an extrovert, so I need to talk to know what I'm thinking. Is that the case for you?
No, so I'm introverted, which means I will process my thoughts internally and then say them when I have got them gathered.
So how does the thinking time thing work for you then?
So in a meeting at times, sometimes I have, say in a partnership meeting, sometimes I wouldn't have contributed if I thought, well, someone else has covered that point. However, by not contributing, I then haven't stated it out loud, I guess, where I sit with things. So I learned to say my thoughts and my opinions, even if someone else had covered it. I think it means I don't always need, I do need time sometimes to talk out loud, and I can get a lot of clarity by that. But it does mean sometimes I need almost encouragement or permission to. And that's where the thinking environment that Nancy Klein talks about is so great for those teams where you have a mixture of people who will just talk without prompting, and those who will need to be encouraged. And it really indicates to everybody that there'll be time for everyone to think and to speak. And so part of it is chairing skills, I think. Also part of it is encouraging those who perhaps wouldn't necessarily have spoken out loud to have said something, and also those who are external processors to also hear other people's processing and thinking. So yeah, that's how I think it can work for all preferences.
So it's a really good book, Time to Think. I would recommend it for anyone who just wants to have a thinking partnership, talk to somebody and allow the other person to think, and then vice versa, they will allow you to think. And it really does transform how you approach conversations, doesn't it?
It really does. And I think even if you think you're good at listening, not you personally, even if one thinks they're
not that good at listening, as I've just proven by interrupting you.
Well, there's always more to learn, isn't there? And I'm certainly learning a lot. It's worth, I think one of the other things that are really worth gaining from the book is her incisive questions. I use this so much. I was using it with my adult son the other week. And her incisive questions where someone is stuck in their thinking and it helps them to get past that. So it's a coaching question. I don't want to spoil it by giving it away, but it helps the person to think past where they're stuck and then come back to, so it opens up choice and freedom again.
Sarah, I am going to ask you what the incisive question is for those people that don't manage to read it. What is this very helpful incisive question?
Yeah, so if somebody is stuck, and I'm trying to think of an example, if someone is stuck with something, thinking, I can't possibly do that, or I can't possibly say no. Maybe that's a good example. So, I can't possibly say no to my boss about that, or my team because of what they'll think. The incisive question takes you, if you could, and if you knew that was going to be okay, so it almost takes you to a place of imagining what's possible and for that to be all right, then what would you do? I've used it at times where I've had some anxiety about the future, for example, and I've just thought, okay, if I knew, this isn't sort of fantasy, but if I knew that this was going to be okay almost, that then what would I use this time for? So it frees you past some as often those anxious thoughts or other limiting beliefs. And that's the thing. So it's where someone's got a limiting belief about what they can do, what's possible, or what's going to be possible in life. It just helps you to think, okay, what would you then do now? So it comes back to now and then gives you that sort of sense of, okay, so what would I do? And that's where your inner wisdom can really...
Love it. I think we're going to use that today. Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. So that is Time to Think by Nancy Klein, an old classic. I really recommend that one. Finally, the book I'd like to recommend, Deeper Mindfulness by Mark Williams and Danny Penman. Now, so this was recommended to me by my friend and colleague, John C. Parkin, who wrote the FIT book. So that's something we're going to be talking about later on in our Hot Topics podcast with our FrogXtra membership. But John said to me, you've got to read this book. Now, a lot of you will already know Finding Peace in a Frantic World. So this is an amazing book. That first book is basically the 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course. And I think there's even some evidence from NICE that it is an evidence-based treatment for depression. It's really fantastic. And you can teach that. You can go and attend a Finding Peace in a Frantic World mindfulness-based stress reduction course. You can buy the book. There's all sorts of meditations that go with it. And I would really, really recommend that. This is the next step. And in fact, this is another 8-week course. And they say you don't even need to have done the first course to be doing this. And it builds on the new research that's come out about the way we think and our brains and mindfulness. And it's really, really helpful. What it talks about is the fact that, I don't know, Sarah, we talk about what's the story in your head all the time, don't we? Like, well, what are you thinking? What story have you made up about that? What are you assuming? This book just says that everything is a story in our head. I am looking at you through a camera right now. We're on a recording platform called Riverside, but my actual brain is only taking in a tiny bit of the information that I'm seeing. What the rest of what I'm seeing is my brain just filling in the blanks from its memory, from what it knows. So I know that I've got a couple of lights here lighting me up. I've got a computer screen here. I've got a window there. I'm not actually seeing that. I'm just, just keeping that there from what I've seen before. And I generally only just work out bits that have changed or whatever. So everything we do in life, what we're smelling, what we're seeing, what we're experiencing is our brain generally filling in the gaps. And we're not really relying on that much actual information that's coming in through our eyes. And so what they're talking about is we do a lot of stuff on autopilot. A lot of our thoughts are on autopilot, our assumptions, and even just what we're thinking, feeling, smelling, all that sort of thing. And how do we get off the autopilot and actually engage in the present moment with the real world? And so again, it takes you through 8 weeks of different meditations to practice this. And the difference between this and the first course is they are now talking about this thing called Vedana, which is your sort of emotional tone. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes I think to myself, oh, I'm feeling a bit rubbish. I'm feeling a bit, there must be something wrong. Something's wrong, right? What is it? Oh, maybe it's that one of my children has upset me this morning, or something's not going right at work. So then, your emotional tone's a bit off. So then you look around for things that are going to confirm why it's off. And then it might ruin the rest of the day. And then your thoughts will match up with that. But actually what this is doing is using some mindfulness techniques to think about to yourself, well, what is the emotional tone? What's going on there? And not then necessarily have to do anything about it, sort of just identify it. Now, I'm not very far into the book, but I think there are some very helpful things that go further on that, John told me about, that a lot of the time you clock it and you go, no action necessary. I don't actually need to do anything about that. And I think that's going to be very helpful for me. So I'm working through, the book and the meditations, and, you can do 5 minutes a day meditation, because we know that mindfulness is about practicing, but there's some really useful, really helpful neuroscience. They talk about the fact that we just exhaust ourselves. We've just got all this stuff going on, and half the time we just don't need to. And I think this is going to be a really good thing for me to do over the summer. So I just encourage other people to get the book. You can then get the free audio meditations that go with it. They give you the link in the book to get that. And I think it's going to be really helpful.
I really like the concept of emotional tone. And a lot of that it's paying attention to our thoughts, isn't it? Paying attention to them, but not necessarily engaging them. And recognizing that, our brains have received so much information, but we filter. That's what we do. We filter based on past experience, don't we? What else is going on? And recognizing how our emotional tone can set the filter. And we don't have control over all of the filter, but we probably have some control over whether we engage with those thoughts or not.
I think what really struck me from this book was that sometimes, I'm feeling a bit pissed off, and I will always blame actual stuff that's happening, but it might just be something that's triggered an unconscious memory of something that happened in the past or whatever. And actually I don't need to do anything. I can just leave it. I don't need to change and act on everything, which for me is quite difficult, because I'm someone who likes to just get over the negative emotions, just move into the future, and everything has to be fine.
There's that recognition, isn't it? I've been thinking a lot about heartfulness as well, and maybe we'll talk about that one time, but just recognizing how the thoughts affect how we feel. And I think some of that deeper mindfulness is very much around that, isn't it? How it affects your actual state, your emotional state.
There's lots to go into. One thing that they get you practicing is using bits of your body to just get in the present moment. And I know we've talked about that with there's some stuff around PQ intelligence and stuff, but actually just focusing your hands or your feet to actually think, just get into the present moment and ignore all that brain stuff that I'm just making up, and return to now. And I just think that can be the key to living a much calmer life. I know in a lot of courses we teach ourselves to recognize the stories that we're telling ourselves, and then work out what's actually true, and stop the assumptions. And I think that's really important and can very much help. But sometimes we just need to notice those thoughts and let them go and feel them in your body. And sometimes there is no action necessary. We don't actually need to do anything about it.
No, we often need to get out of our heads and much more into our bodies. And that groundedness, that's been so helpful for me in many ways, just grounding in those moments, not ruminating.
Absolutely. So there's 4 book recommendations for people over the summer. We've got Deeper Mindfulness, Essentialism, and Sarah, you've got
Time to Think and Rediscovered.
So if you're listening to this on the normal You Are Not a Frog podcast feed, go well over the summer. We've got some great summer episodes, some around wellbeing and some extra stuff. And I will see you for more quick tips again in the autumn. If you're a part of our FrogXtra membership, then hop over to your FrogXtra special bonus podcast for July. And Sarah and I will be exploring a couple more books in there that I really think everybody should be reading. And that is the Ethic books with John Parkin and the Boundaries book, the Book of Boundaries, and diving a bit deeper into those because of some of the things that we've been sort of witnessing in people over the past few months in terms of the training that we'll be doing. So we'll see you over there if you're in the membership. Everyone else, have a great rest of summer and we'll speak soon. Thanks for being with us, Sarah.
Thank you.